Hey everyone, and welcome to week 5 of the best horror stories of the week. This week we had a ton of different kind of stuff, ranging from scarecrows, abandoned buildings, small town horror, just a whole bunch of different stuff. As always, these are placed in no particular order, so it's not like it's like best to worst or worst to best or anything like that. If you do enjoy this video, please be sure to drop a like rating. It is very much appreciated. Let's see if we can reach 1100 likes. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. I do plan on switching back to these long videos strictly, so it will be a few days until my next video. So if you could all drop a like on this one, again, it would be very much appreciated. Also, just out of curiosity, comment your favorite horror story that I have ever narrated on this channel. For one, I'm super curious, and for two, I'm just wondering what kind of stuff I should look out for. So if there's a specific story that you really liked, I would appreciate it if you let me know so I could look for more stories similar to that one. Anyway, again, enjoy the video. Thank you all for the ongoing support. It means the world to me. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. I will never tell my parents how my grandparents really died. They wouldn't believe me if I did. You may not either. About a month ago, I had just gotten out of class when I checked my phone. To my surprise, I had a voicemail from my father. Sure, my mom has called me from time to time since I left for college, but when I saw that my father had called me, I knew it had to be bad news. I just didn't know how bad. Son, we're buying you a plane ticket. You need to fly home tonight. There has been an accident. Call me when you get this. That's all the voicemail really said. I called them and he explained that my grandfather had been killed in an accident with his combine while harvesting corn, and that the shock of finding him had given my grandmother a heart attack. The flight was nerve-wracking. I have never done well with small spaces, and I couldn't smoke on the flight, which made it even worse. I spent the whole flight fidgeting and walking back and forth to the restroom, even though I didn't need to go. I just needed to move around. My dad was already waiting for me when I landed, which ruined my plan of sneaking a cigarette before he showed. He gave me a hug and helped me load my bag in the car. I decided I needed a cigarette bad enough and lit one up in the parking garage. My dad has never seen me smoke, and I tried to act as casually as I could. He raised an eyebrow at me as he closed the trunk. I waited for a lecture or an outburst, but all he did was nod. "That's a nice lighter," he said. I hadn't realized I was still fidgeting with it. I handed him the vintage trench lighter. Ellen, my girlfriend, bought it for me a few weeks ago. Found it at an antique store in Seattle. He took it in his hand and looked it over approvingly. Then he handed it back. "No smoking in the car. Your mother would never let us hear the end of it," he instructed. My headache was gone now that I had a sufficient amount of nicotine. I threw the cigarette down and stomped it out with my foot. An hour later, we were at my parents' house. My mother greeted me with a hug, then she stepped back and looked me up and down. "Your father used to smoke menthols too when he was your age," she said, and gave my father a smirk. I wasn't sure if I was embarrassed she had caught me or surprised my dad used to smoke. He gave me a pat on the shoulder and walked into the house. We spent the night catching up on what I had just been up to while I was in college. They filled me in on how their business was struggling, but they were keeping their head above water. And then eventually my dad filled me in on the details of the funeral. They had decided to do a closed casket on both of my grandparents. The injuries that my grandfather had received apparently were too gruesome for an open casket, and they did a closed casket on my grandmother's so that people wouldn't ask why. The next morning, we attended the funeral. There were only a few people. My grandparents were in their 80s and had very few friends that were still around. Afterwards, we went back to my parents' house and ate. "Son, your mom and I have talked about this. We need to sell your grandparents' farm. We have neither the time or money for the upkeep. If you can take a week off school and clean the place up, get it ready to sell, we'll give you 25% of whatever we get when it sells," my father explained. I took a large bite of chicken and chewed it as I thought it over. I could call the school and explain the situation, and I could easily catch up later. "Yeah, I can do that. But what do you mean clean it up? How bad is it?" I asked. My father and mother exchanged a worried look before she looked back down at her plate. "Just before your grandfather passed, your grandmother called me. She told me that he had been diagnosed with dementia. Between that and their diminished health, I suspect that the property is in pretty bad shape." "You haven't been out there?" I asked. It wasn't more than a couple of hours away. I couldn't believe they hadn't been to visit. My mother replied in a defensive tone. "We've both been working 7 days a week at the shop. We had to let all of our employees go. Business is not going too well." I nodded and asked what the plan was. "I'll drive you out tomorrow. You can stay there until I pick you up Friday. That gives you 6 days to get things boxed up. I already ordered the boxes. They'll be delivered tomorrow." The following day, my father drove me up to the old farm. I spent a few weekends there as a kid. The place always had a creepy vibe, but it was fun. I could walk through the corn all day and never reach the end. As we pulled in, there was a large scarecrow that stood over the corn at the edge of the field. "When did they get that thing?" I asked. My dad didn't answer. Instead, he looked at it out of the corner of his eye. His face contorted into a look of intense worry. Maybe fear. Couldn't tell. As we passed the scarecrow, I looked back. The wind hit it just right, and for a second, I would have sworn it turned its head to watch us. About 20 minutes after I had dropped off, I was still wandering through the house, evaluating the countless knickknacks and pictures, trying to decide what should be kept, sold, or tossed. The phone rang. My heart skipped a beat. It had been so long since I had heard a landline ring. I thought it might be the fire alarm. I answered it. "This is Jim. I'm delivering the boxes you ordered, but my GPS doesn't work out here. Can you give me directions?" the man asked. "Head down Old Country Road about 5 miles. Make a right at the dirt road," I said. I tried to think of a landmark, knowing how vague that was. "You'll see a scarecrow. Make a right at the scarecrow." The man thanked me and hung up. About a half hour later, I was washing the dishes in the sink and cleaning up the kitchen. My grandmother must have just set out lunch before the accident because there were 2 plates of food on the table. It was so rotten I couldn't tell what it was anymore. The pungent smell of mold and rotten food was making me gag, so I had to open the kitchen window. I listened to the wind chimes on the porch and found it rather relaxing. I began to wonder how many summer days my grandparents sat out on the porch, sipped sweet tea, and listened to the wind. Over the wind chimes, I heard a scream from the field. I shut off the water and leaned closer. I heard the scream again, almost as if someone was howling in pain. I rushed outside and stood at the edge of the corn. My grandfather had waited too long to harvest his crop. The sun had bleached the corn until it was now the color of bone. The stalks waved back and forth in the wind. The dry leaves rustled against each other as they swayed. I heard the noise again and began to walk out into the field toward the noise. "Hello?" I yelled. I passed row after row of maize, looking left and right in the 8 inches of space between rows, and then in the distance I saw a figure move. I began to run after it. I caught glimpses of the figure every few seconds as the wind allowed. After a while, I lost sight of it. I ran faster and faster, trying to catch up with whoever it was. And then I ran full speed into the scarecrow. The straw filling did little to dull the impact with the wood post it was mounted on. I fell back onto my back. I grabbed my nose and could feel the palm of my hand immediately filled with warm blood. I sat up and felt dizzy. My head throbbed with each beat of my heart. When I was finally able to stand up, I looked up at the scarecrow. It was probably 7 feet tall, and then another 2 feet off the ground. I was dressed in blue overalls and a red flannel. The head was a burlap bag with thick red string stitched into a jagged mouth, and big black buttons sewn on for eyes. Then it was topped with a straw hat stitched on with the same red string used for the mouth. This thing was intimidating to me at 6'2". Those crows must be terrified of it, thought to myself. I pinched my nose to stop the bleeding and began to look around. I saw this scarecrow when we pulled in. There was no way I made it to the road already. I tried to hop up to see over the corn. I couldn't see anything but more corn all the way to the horizon. And when my feet landed, my head felt like it was going to pop. Thick blood began to flow more quickly from my nose. I pinched my nose and held my head back, facing the sky to slow the bleeding. Out of the corner of my eye, that's when I saw it. The scarecrow had turned to face me. I turned to face the oversized doll and figured that it must have been the wind again. For a second, we made eye contact. The big button eyes seemed to be looking right at me. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was the wind that moved the head. It was just a bag filled with straw. It was the wind that was blowing the stalks, and I imagined it was a figure running. It had been the wind that was howling as it passed through the leaves. But still, as I stared at it, I knew it was staring back. The hair on my arms began to raise, making my arms tingle. My heart began to quicken, and then the scarecrow abruptly lifted its head back up and stared out over the field. I ran. I ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. I stole short glances over my shoulder as I pushed through the corn. All I could see was a path of broken corn stalks behind me. Soon I heard a rumbling noise ahead of me. A truck, I thought. I kept pushing on. My lungs began to burn with the effort. My foot caught in a shallow irrigation ditch and sent me tumbling onto the dirt driveway. The driver of the truck locked up his brakes and skid past me, missing me by inches. I laid there in the dust for a moment. The driver got out of his truck. "What's wrong with you?" he asked. His tone was harsh and angry. I stood up to face him. He was in his mid-40s with a big beard and even bigger beer belly. "I'm sorry, I lost my footing," I said. I looked back into the field expecting to see the monster coming out any second. The man followed my gaze into the field and looked back at me. "You high, boy?" he asked seriously. I stopped myself. Telling him I was being chased by a scarecrow would only reinforce his accusation. "I hit my head pretty hard," I said, placing my hand back on my nose. He nodded and then offered to give me a ride back up to the house. "I would have been here earlier if you knew how to give directions. There wasn't no scarecrow at the road," he said. We pulled up to the house and began unloading the boxes he came to deliver. "I'll be back Friday to pick them up once they're full. Your dad booked a storage shed on the other side of town. You have about 200 square feet, so keep that in mind as you pack," the man said. He stared into the field. "My daddy has a cornfield in the next county. He didn't do half as well as they did here. Actually, now that I think about it, I drove past this place last year. I remember they had a rough crop last year. Do you know what they did differently this year?" the driver asked. "No, I'm sorry. I don't have any idea," I answered. He nodded and spit. "Well, take care of yourself. I'll see you on Friday." With that, he left. I went inside and grabbed a clean shirt. I washed the blood off of my face and hands in the bathroom and changed. I tried to shake off the incident with the scarecrow. I must be more stressed out with the loss of my grandparents than I realized. I needed a distraction and began to pack up the office downstairs. I was putting papers in a trash bag when I came across a letter my grandmother had written. "Son, I need some help with your father. The dementia is getting worse. The last 2 days he has been raving like a lunatic. This spring a man came by and offered us a scarecrow as a gift. He said it did wonders for his crop and wanted to pay it forward. Your father told him no at first, thinking the man was a swindler, but he insisted he didn't want anything in return. Anyway, your father is now convinced that the scarecrow is the reason we had such a great crop this year, but the scarecrow won't let him harvest it. I have left you several voicemails about this and you haven't called me back, so I thought I would write you. Please help. I'm worried about your father. Mom. I put the letter down and sat in the office chair. I could dismiss my experience with the scarecrow as stress or an overactive imagination, but my grandfather having similar worries about the same scarecrow? What are the odds? I thought to myself. I needed a cigarette. I went outside to the porch and lit one. I took a long drag and then exhaled. A cool breeze blew by, bringing up the wind chimes to life. I turned around to look at them and see if one would be worth keeping. That's when I saw it. The scarecrow was now just 20 feet into the field. It hung on its post, staring at me. While I was still trying to process this, it fell down. More like hopped down. Immediately the post went up and then disappeared into the field. It can't be alive, I thought to myself. Seconds later, the scarecrow came out of the corn. It began running across the lawn, carrying the 10-foot post like a Trojan soldier running with a spear. The scarecrow launched the post. It sailed across the yard and missed me by a foot. It took down the wind chimes and impaled the wall behind me. I turned to run inside, but the post was now blocking my entrance. I hopped the rail on the porch and ran toward the old barn. I could hear the scarecrow running behind me, gaining on me, the straw rustling under his overalls and flannel. Once I was inside the barn, I tried to close the door, but it was stuck open from years of neglect. I grabbed the closest thing I could use as a weapon. A pitchfork. The scarecrow entered the room. Its jagged mouth and button eyes now seemed much more menacing as it marched toward me. I rammed the pitchfork into its chest as hard as I could. It pierced deep into its body easily, but it seemed to have no effect. With its left hand, or burlap mitten really, it grabbed my arm. The thing was impossibly strong. It used its right hand to pull the pitchfork out and then turn it toward me. I struggled uselessly against its grip. I desperately searched my pockets for something I could use as a weapon. I took my lighter out and flipped the top open. The flame caught almost instantly. In seconds, the scarecrow was fully engulfed. It let me go and fled into the field. The field was burned in less than an hour. The fire department said it was overly dry because it wasn't harvested on time. They didn't have any interest in investigating the matter further. My father saw the post stuck in the wall when he picked me up. I knew he recognized it as the scarecrow's post because he didn't ask any questions about how it got thrown through the wall or how the field burned down. I know on some level he suspects that the scarecrow killed his parents. I know on some level that he is grateful I killed it. But I know we will never discuss it because people would think we were crazy. I adopted Daisy a little over 4 years ago while I was in the worst depression of my life. Immediately after bringing her home, it felt like that warm little ball of fuzz and puppy teeth was working to fill that gaping hole left in my life after the death of my brother. I can say with confidence that she's saved my life twice now. She's a healthy 134-pound St. Bernard with no concept of personal space, and I love her to death. She knows a handful of tricks, but she's stubborn and rarely cooperates. In many ways, she's a completely mundane dog, content to act as my personal weighted blanket at any and all opportunities. The only thing out of the ordinary about Daisy is that I have never in my life seen her eat anything. That is, until recently. Especially as a puppy, this behavior was extremely concerning to me. I tried hand feeding her, mixing her food with warm water. Hell, I even tried bottle feeding her. She wouldn't eat any of it. 4 days after I first adopted her, I was about to call the vet to schedule an appointment when I noticed something. The bowl I left out for her was empty. The small aluminum dish that was packed with a pale brown mountain of dried dog food the night before had entirely vanished, save for a few loose crumbs left at the bottom. Relieved, I filled the bowl, thinking that maybe Daisy was just shy, or adjusting to her new home, or something like that. Still, I consulted with the vet about this behavior at her next checkup. Well, she's definitely a healthy weight for her age. The vet said nonchalantly as she hoisted Daisy off the scale, "It's not unheard of for dogs to do this sort of thing, especially as puppies," she continued. "Just be sure to keep an eye out for any weight loss, lethargy, or vomiting," she warned. "If you do, give me a call immediately," she said, crouching down to pet Daisy on the head, which she returned with an inelegant kiss on the cheek. So, thinking nothing of it, we left. Months turned to years and Daisy remained the picture of canine health, save for a brief case of kennel cough a few weeks after her second birthday. Each night I would fill her bowl, and each morning it would be picked clean, yet I would never actually see her eating. I found myself on occasion checking the bowl late into the night. Over the years I've narrowed it down to around 1:45 a.m. being the time the bowl goes from full to empty. Even still, she's never eaten anything around me. No treats, not kibble. Even when I offer her some steak or chicken, she turns her head to the side or smacks it out of my hand before walking away as if I've offended her. That all changed last week. It started off as standard as any other Saturday night. I was on the couch binge watching whatever a series I can't recall. Daisy sleeping soundly on top of me. With a start, she leaped off my chest and onto the floor, darting out of the room. Immediately I got up. Daisy never acts like this. Fumbling through the dark of the house, feeling out for a light switch, I heard it. A low growl coming from the far side of the room. That was when I heard a sharp yelp and the weighty thump of fur hitting the hardwood floor. I didn't even think. I charged into the darkness after Daisy. Just as my eyes adjusted to the dim light of the kitchen, I was able to make out the silhouette of a man. He was tall, his obscured head nearly brushed the ceiling. The rest of his figure was indescribable in the dark, standing as an obelisk of pure obsidian, cutting through the dull gray. He was standing in front of an open window that I was sure I had locked. He reeled back to kick Daisy once more when I threw myself out at him, tackling him blindly to the floor. I felt nothing but pure animosity for this man as I began to wail mercilessly on him, pummeling his face, chest, anything within reach. I grabbed his head as I pinned him to the floor and began slamming it into the hardwood. I pulled back my arm, fully intending to shatter the stranger's nose into his brain, or even touching Daisy, when I felt a hot sting in my side. I looked down. He stabbed me. A small knife was jabbed into my abdomen, the blade shining in the dim light, blood trickling down the cool silver and pooling at my feet. The intruder pushed me to the side, the blade digging even deeper into my torso, with pain spreading throughout like a white-hot nail being driven along my veins. He stood up, dusting himself off before delivering a strong kick to the back of my head for good measure, the blow sending me reeling as I struggled for breath. That's when I heard something snap. It sounded exactly like when you break a twig in half, the fibrous material straining against itself as it tears asunder. Alarmingly, the sound was coming from Daisy's direction, who had yet to move from the corner she had been kicked into. As she stood upright, I heard it again, as well as a meaty thump that sounded almost like wet laundry falling on concrete. What rose from Daisy's spot on the floor could scarcely be called a dog. I don't know if it was the kick to the head, the blood loss, or a combination of the two, but what I saw that day was not of this world. Massive, even larger than Daisy, and with mandibles dripping with shred flesh that bisected her face. Her coat slumped off, revealing reptilian scales that glistened with moisture. Before I could even blink, a mass of writhing tentacles burst forward from between the mandibles, grabbing the intruder by the ankles and torso, causing him to slam into the ground before being pulled towards Daisy's maw. I'm sure you can imagine what happened next. Between the gurgling screams and the blood and viscera being thrown across the room, I'm glad I lost consciousness around this point. When I woke up several hours later, I was in the hospital with Daisy sleeping comfortably at my side, barely fitting into the cramped bed. Apparently, a neighbor heard the commotion and called the police to investigate. When they got inside, they found me lying in a pool of my own blood. Daisy by my side, thankfully unharmed. They found no trace of a break-in, so they bought my made-up story about tripping and falling into a knife with concerning ease. As I'm writing this week later, my side still hurts and Daisy is just as lovely as ever. She's laying on my legs as I write this right now, in fact. I still think back to that night, but strangely I'm not as wary of her as one might think. She's still my dog and I love her, even if she does turn out to be some crazy tentacle monster. Well, either way, I think I know what she eats now. Only one question still haunts my mind. Who or what has she been eating up until then? The white bar scrolled across the bottom of my television, interrupting my rerun of the poorly written series finale of Game of Thrones. Again? I whispered to myself as I watched the breaking news bulletin scroll across the bottom of my television. I grunted as I sat up from my slouched position on the couch, squinting my eyes as I attempted to read the script. Breaking news. Body of missing 16-year-old Brenda Baker found near Penny Creek, bordering the town of Elms. Visit the local news channel for more info. I sighed as I grabbed my phone and pressed the unlock button, the screen light momentarily blinding me. I blinked repeatedly as my eyes adjusted to the light, opening up the local news channel's top stories page. 16-year-old Brenda Baker found by a local hunter after being missing for a week. Authorities claim foul play is involved, adding to a 3-month string of murders in the town of Elms. Police advise a curfew, beginning at 9 p.m. weeknights. My thoughts wandered as the text went on, explaining the brutality of the murder and the condition that the body was found in. That was the 11th body found over the course of 3 months in the town of Elms. My little cabin sat at the edge of the town limits, in a heavily forested area near that very creek. I had bought this property for its seclusion, but it seemed as though it had become quite the hotbed of activity lately. The other victims had been found near the creek as well, and frustratingly enough, meant that I'd again have the police knocking at my door in the morning. All of this began 3 months ago during the winter months. The only exception was that the body that was found near Penny Creek was that of my 10-year-old niece, Lily. I remember the call from my sister, her hysterical cries that haunt my nightmares. I felt my face redden and my eyes begin to tear up as I thought of my sweet niece, Lily. She loved her Uncle Darren, and I loved her like my own. Some of the happiest moments I'd had over the past 5 years, since I came back from active duty, involved Lily. The week wouldn't go by fast enough when my sister would ask me if Lily could come stay the weekend. Full of life and full of spirit, she would run through the trees laughing as I chased her. I would scoop her up in my arms when I caught up to her, both of us wailing in laughter. She would pat me on the head and say, "My turn, Uncle Darren. You'd better run." She made my heart so full, and I wouldn't be able to wipe the grin off my face. I don't think I'd cracked a smile since the last time I saw her. I buried my head into my hands after turning off the television and putting down my phone. In the dark, I shook violently as the flashbacks began yet again. I would see myself strapped down to a large metal table, a sharp sting in my arm, jolting my entire body. I could not understand the language of my captor and had no idea what I was injected with. I could see as my body thrashed about, followed by an instant complete darkness. My mind flashed back to waking up covered in blood, being drugged by my sergeant. What had I done? How had he found me? "We got you, bud. It's over." That phrase would repeat over and over inside of my head as I gritted my teeth and squeezed my head and eyes shut. It was never over. I don't remember the events that took place after I blacked out on that table. I was told afterwards of the slaughter I had committed in that foreign military hospital. My sergeant outlined the bloodshed that took place by my own hands. I would not fully understand until much later, after returning to the States, what I had become. The only peace I had found was in that little girl, my niece Lily. She brought me back from that dark place. She kept the flashbacks from taking hold of my mind. She kept the blood and trauma confined in the dark recesses of my mind. She replaced those thoughts with a semblance of hope. My hope was gone. Now, yet another family had lost theirs as well. I shoved myself up off of the couch, and without turning a light on or putting on my shoes, bolted out of my front door. Escaping those thoughts was much harder these days. I would walk through the dark forest until my feet bled, almost in a trauma-induced trance, until I could regain my composure. I would picture myself and Lily running through the trees as I stomped along the well-trodden path along my property. Eventually, my heartbeat would decrease, and I'd be able to breathe again. The nightmares then subsided. Even in death, my little Lily would still be there to bring me back down to earth again. This time, though, was different. I was pounding my bare feet along the path furiously when I heard it. A soft sobbing rang out near my property line. I stopped dead in my tracks, immediately whipping my head towards the mournful cries. I thought that maybe this was a figment of my mind, an intrusive voice among the shadows. That is, until I heard the second voice. This voice was a deep, loud, booming one, spitting obscenities and vulgarities. The other voice, which I assume was a child, would whimper quietly after the shouting subsided. Instinctively, I crouched as low as the ground as I could, inching my way towards the sound in the distance. As I got closer, the commotion playing out in the darkness, I saw a light. It looked to me to be a handheld flashlight, violently being slung back and forth. As it swung forward, I'd hear the thud of it making contact with something, followed by a soft, guttural moan. My mind was racing. My thoughts tore through my head at an alarming speed as I attempted to regain consciousness of my surroundings. As I crept along, not making a noise, my front foot eventually hit something wet. It was the beginning of the shallows of the creek, Penny Creek. Slowly, I purposefully placed my steps forward, as to make sure that I made no noise and alert the individuals to my presence. I followed the light with my eyes, as it glowed brightly in the black dark of the forest. After carefully slinking myself forward, I came to the edge of an opening next to the creek, surrounded by thick, bristled brush. My hand shook violently, and my heart beat loudly in my chest as I lifted it from my side, to make an opening in the brush to where I could see what was taking place. To this day, when I close my eyes, I can still see the scene taking place ahead of me in my mind. A large, bearded man stood with his back facing me, and his large hand in the air, gripping the flashlight. As he brought it down, I could make out where the loud thud was coming from. A small girl no older than 12 was crouched in fear at the base of a large oak tree. She was smeared with blood and her clothes were in shambles. Her hands were raised in a defensive position over her head, pitifully attempting to block the blows from the large man and his flashlight. She screamed with each crack of the heavy flashlight on her body. The force from the first blow was enough to physically push her to the ground. Before I could even register what was taking place, my eyes closed and I felt my mind go into that dark void once again. My blood boiled as I forced my eyes open to look upon the scene once again. Except there, instead of the little girl, my mind showed me my Lily, my beautiful little niece, being beaten to death by this giant of a man. The last time I had felt this kind of rage, I had blacked out completely, after lying there on that metal table in that hospital. This time, however, it felt as though I had given up the rights to my own body. I felt strangely calm, despite the tearing of my flesh being replaced with a dark, black fur, despite my teeth growing and gnashing abruptly. The man had resumed screaming and loudly berating the child, unaware of his immediate surroundings. I watched myself through my own eyes as I crept up behind the man, feeling my own lips curl up into a snarl. I had no control over myself, but it was okay. I couldn't help but feel joy when my claws first dug into the man's back. I couldn't help but internally smile as I whipped him around, facing me, a horrified look plastered on his face. I couldn't help but enjoy the taste, and I wrapped my maw around the man's head. And I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction as I crunched down. The man's screams finally silenced for the last time. I ripped the man's head from his shoulders, just in time to see the little girl slouched over behind him. As my body threw the body of the large man to the side, I focused on the girl. I could hear the faint beat of her heart. She was still alive. All at once, I felt the control come back over my body completely. My hands and arms, along with my mouth, dripped with blood of a murderer. My own niece's murderer. Still shaken and sore, I dropped the little girl off at the local hospital and left before I was noticed. I didn't think a man covered with blood dropping off a girl, also covered in blood, would fare too well for me. The next day, I saw another breaking news statement stroll across my television as I was slouched over on my couch. Breaking news. 11-year-old Peyton Darling, recovering after a brutal attempt on her life. Man tied to serial killings found dead near Penny Creek. They showed a picture of the little girl from a school yearbook on the screen, and I smiled gently. She looked just like my Lily. It piss-poured rain on the night that Eric finally left me. Becoming a new dad was too stressful. We hadn't planned the pregnancy, and we hadn't even been dating for a year. It was just too much. At the time, I was already 35 weeks pregnant, far too late to consider an abortion. He downloaded Tinder, and I moved back home with my father. My pregnancy anxiety went through the roof. I felt abandoned. Totally alone in this brave new world of impending motherhood. My body hurt, but my soul felt hurt too. Pregnancy had been painted as this glowing, transformative moment in my life. Now, it felt radioactive. The shimmering pink forum banners and soft blue blog backgrounds suddenly turned my stomach. The punchlines to awful jokes. I hated seeing my body, swollen and itchy and stolen, in the window of every store. I cursed the heartburn, the uncontrolled emotions, the vivid dreams. The nightmares were bad. The sex dreams featuring Eric, so much worse. Endlessly exhausted, emotionally, physically, mentally. I still loved the idea of my son though. It wasn't his fault. He didn't spin some divine wheel to select a broken home. He was just a little boy, curled up under my rib cage, punching pint-sized fists against my abdomen, making me a mother one day at a time. It became ritual for me to check my pregnancy apps at midnight when the third trimester insomnia really kicked into gear. It was comforting watching the weeks and days slowly dwindle. As my due date edged closer, I tried to stay focused on the positive. 34 days left. 36 weeks and 4 days since my tiny one took root. Nesting didn't come naturally, but I started to try. Babies need a plethora of things. Everything specialized and miniaturized, painted with tiny animals and bright pops of color. Extra sensitive, extra soft, extra expensive. I couldn't afford much, so I turned to my Facebook mom groups. I explained my situation. I accepted pity in return for help and gathered together all the odds and ends to a makeshift second-hand nursery. My only splurge was on his swing and an outfit declaring, "I love Mama," with matching socks. I was responsible and only met people at police stations or public coffee houses. Until Kathy. I read your posts in the Expecting Mothers June 2022 group. Her first message opened, "And my heart is broken for you. I had an Eric too. It felt so personal to me." The message was followed by a chain of blue emoji hearts and sad faces. My nursery was almost finished, but her profile picture showed a smiling, mid-20-something blonde with a perfect baby bump and beautiful smile. She had an Eric too. I replied and our conversation felt natural. Her Eric had left her out of the blue. She'd done everything to save the relationship. Some things just weren't meant to be. Motherhood was salvation. The love a mother could overcome anything. She wanted to help me. Postpartum depression can be so real, she wrote. I don't want you to feel alone like I did when my Eric left. Let me be your bonus support person. I'll help with the nursery. No mom shaming around here. Secondhand just means love before, and sometimes that's even better. You know it's good. My mom was dead. My sisters out of state. My friend group non-existent. My dad a drunk. Kathy didn't know it, but she wasn't my bonus support person. She was my only support person. The only one checking on me. A blessing. We'd only been talking a couple days, but my soul yearned for her to be there. I just wanted one other person to care about my baby. We met for coffee a half-dozen times. She was everything she was online. Beautiful, glowing, kind, full of bubbly laughter and advice, always warning me to be careful. Don't accidentally trip with that bump. I felt seen. For the first time since Eric left, I felt supported. 10 days left. 38 weeks and 4 days, and finally I had some peace. I messaged Kathy that night. I can't believe how close I am. My OB says he's measuring perfectly and a little ahead. He's so ready to meet the world. He moves so much these days. I cannot wait to hold him. She replied almost instantly. I'm so excited. You know, I still haven't seen your nursery. Are you sure you don't have any last-minute things to do? Bags all packed? Anything you need help with? Just ask. The third trimester anxiety really is a bitch. I knew I was ready, but a second set of eyes couldn't hurt. I wanted to be sure. Why don't you just come over tomorrow? Check it out and feel free to bring your little one. I have lots of baby supplies after all. I added my address to the end. Kathy hearted the message and I went to bed. My dad left for work that morning at 7:45 and I spent 2 hours cleaning and fussing over the house. I didn't want Kathy to think I was unprepared. In a weird way, I wanted her to be proud of me. I hoped that I would be an excellent, perfect example of a mom like she was so effortlessly. I heard a car pull up around 9:30. Her sensible blue Ford Fusion with the baby on board sticker stuck out on the back glass. I watched nervously by the front door as she unloaded a car seat with a dark blue cover that perfectly matched the designer diaper bag swinging from her shoulder. Her hair was golden in the sunlight. Her black sundress fit perfectly. How did her Eric ever justify leaving her? She had to haunt him in his sleep. She rang the doorbell, and I ushered her inside. "Oh, Amy, that bump is just perfect." She grinned as she placed down the car seat before standing up and reaching out to rest a hand on my belly. "He really is ready to meet the world." "Do you want to see his nursery?" I couldn't hide the nervous tremor from my voice. "We can see if..." I paused, trying to remember her son's name. "If your little one approves," I finished. Pregnancy brain kicking into full, embarrassing gear. "I'm sure he'll adore it. Do you want to hold him? You can take him out. My back gets to killing me from packing him around." She giggled, rubbing her back with a theatrical grimace. I giggled too. "This is so silly of me, but what's his name again?" I felt embarrassed to ask as I kneeled down to introduce myself to the little boy that belonged to the perfect mother. "Eric." I didn't have time to react. Pregnancy makes sudden movement impossible, especially in the late term. I barely managed to glance up in confusion before I felt something heavy come crashing directly into my face. The world tilted in a dizzying stream of colors. Pain shot through my head, and then my tailbone as I tumbled over backwards. Instinctively, my hands came up to shield my stomach. My baby, and another blow landed, the diaper bag with horrific force, before everything turned dark, and I was floating, or drowning, or maybe burning alive. I felt pain more real than anything I had ever experienced, so lancing and hot that my mind refused to hold on to it. My eyes felt glued shut. My chest ached for air. It felt like an insurmountable weight was crushing my entire body. Nothing existed but the pain, and nothing would or could again. I didn't even feel human anymore. I'd been reduced to acid and ashes. I wanted to die until I heard a cry. A wailing, hiccuping cry. A baby. My son. In a world shaped by impossible blinding pain, I knew that he had been born. The most extraordinary moment and one thought. I want to hold my baby now. Please. My voice, scratching and faint. Another cry and the willpower to open my eyes. Kathy kneeled above me. Her milk-white arms streaked red with gore, and her dress now a limp, wet thing smeared onto her like a slowing demonic skin. Her facial expression was rapture, the most malignant ecstasy. She held him, my wailing, red and purple-faced child. The memory of his tiny fist curled around her finger, of his echoing cries, of her falsely won tears of joy, is one that will forever haunt me in my sleep. In that moment, I understood. You read stories online of parents accomplishing incredible feats to rescue a child, the inhuman burst of adrenaline, a love beyond that can be explained, an instinct older than language and more powerful than fate. It usually reads like feel-good bullshit, but there is a truth in there somewhere. It wasn't a thought or a plan, but just a fact. I was his mother, and I would never allow him to be taken by a nightmare. I could never tell you in detail what it feels like to press your organs in with one hand, feel the squish of blood and split skin, and not pass out immediately, nor what kind of strength it takes to reach out with the other, desperate and searching, until you find the knife placed so casually aside that just disemboweled you. It's a racing, raw feeling. It's a whole lot of damage. The real surge comes 2 minutes later and takes every ounce of strength and desire that you have ever had. It takes dangerous, overwhelming need when you throw yourself forward with one chance to commit physical exorcism against the closest thing to real evil you've ever encountered. If I'm crouching violence in purple prose, blame it on the human mind tapping out in that moment. I don't remember stabbing Kathy 16 frantic times while an infant squirmed between us. It was a bloodbath, I know that. There was no giant swinging motions, more tight, focused digging, grinding, shoving ones. And Kathy, so caught up in her repellent act, never ran out of audacity. "My baby," she kept saying. "Eric." Everything happened so fast. The aftermath felt sudden and cold, like taking a leaping plunge into a frozen lake. I hadn't moved much, but I had already broken through some bodily limit. The world swam around me. There was so much noise, crying and screaming. My baby. I managed to take him, reclaim him. I remember dropping the knife, shoving it in a skidder across the entryway's tile. Minutes streaked by in black hazes of half memory. I knew I was dying, escorting Kathy all the way to hell, but my son lived. I could feel him, warm and heavy on my chest as I struggled to do one last thing. If she'd moved on to the kitchen, or we'd made it to the nursery, there would be no one to tell this story. But the mail runs just a little later, after 10:30 at my house, and we were right by the front door. Placing my son aside for his safety as I swayed forward, tugging my ruined body for the door, felt harder than everything else, but I didn't want to fall and hurt him as I tilted forward, grasping the doorknob and saving us. My mail woman is a stern face, retired teacher named Alexandria. I left the hospital 2 months ago with a 3-month-old baby boy named Alexander. The mail woman checks on us often, and postpartum depression really hasn't been an issue for me at all after my very special delivery. Hey y'all, I was searching around for others who may have experienced the same or similar to me. My whole life I have seen odd things that escalated very recently, and I am kind of freaked out. I am not sure my eyes are my eyes any longer. No one else seems to see these things, and when you read my post about the other night, that thing, I'm not sure whose eyes these would be, but I'm not confident they are mine. I saw this forum existed and I couldn't quite find what I was looking for, so I decided to share my story and let others come to me if they can help. I have kept a journal for a long time, so most of my experiences are written within hours or a day of the event, so it should be accurate and fresh without the distortion time and memory can cause. I did have a couple of childhood events that I will include as well. They were not chronicled at the time, but I feel their memory is somewhat accurate, and not just a childhood nightmare or a real event taken out of context over time. I am listing everything in chronological order. If you see any 4 stars, it means I have redacted something that would be personally identifying, or it could be identifying with some snooping. I want to remain private. The most I will state about where I live is it is Lovecraft country, meaning it is an area that Lovecraft wrote about frequently. So has Stephen King for that matter. A lot of horror stories really, to be honest. Kinda weird. Also, unless otherwise noted in the entry, see the road trip. Everything has happened within 50 miles of each other, as I have lived in this area only for my whole life. Changing towns here and there, but always within 25 miles of my birth town. If you see 2 parentheses, then I added something that was not originally in that entry for this post specifically, usually to add more information that may be needed for understanding. Childhood experiences. I remember one time helping my father clear some brush in the wood, a lot of dead trees, and forest. Floor building, a concern in case of a wildfire. While I was out one day, I saw a cat on a branch. It was a big fluffy one, all gray. The branch it was on literally could not be holding its weight. Impossible to real-world physics. It was too long and thin. It would crack or at least dip. Beyond that, I remember the cat having glowing eyes. Not like the normally reflective qualities of cats' eyes. More like coals from the furnaces of hell type glow and brightness. I did not stick around to see more. A couple years later, in the same woods, I think I saw what one could call an elf. Old European elf. That is, not Lord of the Rings style. It ignored me and walked away because I wanted nothing to do with it. A theme with me. January, 4 stars. The concert tonight went well, Mr. Stars. Picked some good music that as a whole we were actually able to play. Not sure why he picked January for it though. The weather was bad. It wasn't bad when I drove in, met Stars, and she let me know the weather was supposed to turn, and her mom wanted her home right after the concert. Sucks. While waiting for everything to start, got a new record in Snake. Tim still can't read music, so he was relegated to the bass drum. He actually did well. He's growing up. Sam nailed the timpani and xylophone. She would probably be section leader, and not me if she had the dexterity for the snare and could play set. As it was, the rest did alright. I messed up a couple of places, but recovered well, and I nailed the anvil part of Song of the Blacksmith. Gustav Holst, Suite in F, Movement 3. The ride home is where it got weird. I left the school, and before I got to the top of Stars Hill, it was completely a whiteout. I never drove in something like this before, so I went slow, but I got so confused because everything was the same. I could only see a few feet in front of the car, and no lights from the houses made it through. General explanation of this next part, as it would not be clear if I left it as is. My town was expansionist, and had multiple developments, which are streets that are segmented out and developed by a single contractor to sell or lease to new homeowners. Several of these developments linked streets that were otherwise not linked prior except by the main road. I turned onto the wrong road because it was so bad. I couldn't even tell it wasn't my street, and had to do a couple of circles to find the development linking that street to my street, as I couldn't even find my way back to the main road. After I finally got onto Stars Street, things got weird. I saw a light, but I shouldn't have. The snow was so bad that I couldn't even see my headlights, and yet I could see a light that was definitely off the streets. It wasn't a light, though. Snow didn't seem to touch this. I could see it reflected in the snow around it, so it wasn't in my car or a reflection in my windshield or something. It was kind of like the Cheshire Cat, a floating face of blue light. It wasn't originally looking at me, but it moved its attention, and when it saw me looking at it from my now stopped car, it looked startled for a second, then disappeared. Just turned off like someone flipped a switch. That's it. I made it home a few minutes later, and now I'm writing this. The face wasn't overly detailed, just a mouth and eyes. I saw it at an angle, but it did turn slightly to it was more directly visible to me. It was about 3 feet off the ground, I think. I don't know if it had a body, I just couldn't see. Stars also smoked some weed before the concert, so I don't know if I got a secondary high or something and it was a hallucination, but given other past experiences, I doubt it. October 24th, Stars. Road trip with James as planned. He promised a road trip to his hometown would be worth it, but don't know why anyone would want to go to Stars, but whatever. I wasn't doing anything else, and James is okay to hang out with. Not sure about worth it, but there are a lot of memories made. He doesn't have a car, so I picked him at the university, and found out Darren and Jeff were going too. Not a problem, I had room. My first stop was at my parents' house, grabbed some food, and grabbed some stuff from my old room for the weekend. You'd think at this point I'd have everything I cared about or needed from them, but I seem to remember something else every week. After we left there, we hit the interstate and started a drive that was longer than I expected. I didn't realize it was going to be 3 hours to get there. I hate stars, the state I live in. In the car, I learned several new things. Apparently, James is a psychic vampire and likes to hang out with me because I always have an overabundance of good energy. He's good people, but really weird. I also learned Darren was planning to go into experimental medicine. I never knew what his major was, but apparently, he was doing a dual degree in engineering and pre-med. I hope we remain friends. Spoilers, we didn't. Because I am probably going to die of cholesterol someday, and he wants to make system flushing nanobots for a lot of common health issues. We finally get down there for our weekend. James promised that it is the best place to go for Halloween. I figure Salem must be, but whatever. Spoilers again. Neither is. First thing we do there is stop at the high school football game. Nothing spookier than a sport I don't care about. We went to visit the band afterward, which was awkward since the three of us didn't know anyone, and they were just changing in the band room, which was weird and icky. After all this, we went to not James' house, but to the house of one of his family's friends to watch Van Helsing, which was alright, and weird. Glad I skipped it in the theaters, though. Their house was super decorated, which was cool, and they had some kick-ass apple cider. Darren, Jeff, and I decided this was a weird visit. More like James was homesick and kind of tricked us into going with him. After we left the house, he took us to the first truly spooky thing, about a half-mile from the high school. On a walking path in the woods, there was a weird shrine-like statue. It had no inscription, and was of a woman with a cloak. It looked old, but not ancient, like early 1900s, not 1700s. James said the statue was important because it awakened his psychic vampire powers. The statue itself was of normal height and proportion. Just a woman with a cloak. It was made of stone. There were no lights except the flashlights James brought, which I wish he told the rest of us to as well, but whatever. James asked us to sit cross-legged in front of it with the backs of our hands and our knees, and fingers up, thumb and middle connected like a circle. I couldn't because of my old knee injury. When you're measuring throwing competitions for track, don't get hit by javelins is all I got to say on that. The rest did though, so I got to stand aside with my flashlight and make sure that nothing happened. If a bear came out of the woods, I was running, so I don't know what they wanted me to do. Getting Jeff to sit still for 5 minutes is a miracle, but it happened. I was thinking about that as I started to feel uneasy. I looked around, but couldn't find anything off, so I just continued to stand. After about 10 minutes, I was super bored. I wish my phone was backlit so I could play Snake. The uneasiness got stronger, and I finally noticed something off. The statue. It looked different. A slight twitch of the lips, maybe, but it just looked cleaner, with fewer cracks than before. I couldn't tell, but it was not the same as when we got there. I also felt more tired. At this point, I gave up and tapped James' shoulder. I think he fell asleep. He didn't get up easily, and he seemed groggy. After this, we went back to his parents' house and met his mother. Redacting the rest of the story, imagine 2 more barely entertaining days in a small town during Halloween season. You get the gist. November 12th, stars. I've only been an RA, resident assistant, for a couple of months, but man, I regret it. I am the unluckiest. I've had to call ambulances and police more than any other RA this semester. Pat let me know during our last meeting. Last night, I had to do rounds in Stars Hall. When the year started, I was stoked to not have to live there. That place has been creepy forever. It's built into a hill, so the first and second stories are in the hill itself on one side of the building, and normal on the other. I would never want to live in one of the dorms that was literally in the hill with no window. I think that's a war crime. Stars also has the highest self-afflicted violence rate, as Tammy puts it in our skip meetings. Pat equals resident director and Tammy equals his boss. It has something to do with the fact half the building doesn't get light, we think, so the RAs there have additional training about what to look out for regarding emotional health. Anyway, since it sits in the same quad as Stars, my dorm, apparently if all their RAs are unavailable, they pull from other buildings. Lucky me. So I found myself in this creepy building, in an office I don't know, and doing rounds in halls I don't know, to check on kids I don't know. Great night. To be fair, it kind of was until my last round at 3 a.m. It had been quiet and I got my homework done, and was just watching TV in the office. Normally, I would go back to my room, but since I was in a different building, they told me to sit it out in the office all night. It was my last round of the night. I was on the second story, hillside, as I passed one of the bathrooms. There was a blood puddle on the ground. Not again. It was large, too, at least 1.5 feet across. It also went under the door, so my guess was it was seepage. I knock on the door and warn them I am going to open the door. I have to do this as it's off-gender. No response, so I opened it up. More blood on the ground. It looked like it was a river coming from a stall. I asked if anyone in there could hear me. The last time I had this happen, Stars. A journal entry not being included with this post. I called the EMTs. It only took a couple of minutes. Stars is the closest hall to the on-site EMT volunteers. They literally just pull off of the building and drive 100 feet, if that. I was approached by the lead EMT, the same one the last 2 times I had to call them. He knows me by name now. He asked where the issue was. He was literally standing in the blood. I pointed to the stall and let him know he was standing in the blood. He looked confused. He checked in the stall, but no one was there. He let me know he couldn't see any blood. I looked down again, and now I couldn't see it either. He checked me out while the rest went back. He told me he was going to speak to Pat and get me some time off. He also suggested I speak to the on-campus counselor. He was worried I had seen too many bad things in too short of a period. We'll see what today brings. This was originally written the morning after before I met with Pat or Tammy. They were concerned for me and had me take a couple of weeks off. I also had to be cleared by the university counselor before I could return to work. April 13th, Stars. Work sucked, and I saw spooky shit again. It's been 6 years, so I was hoping that was done with. Work always sucks, though. I can't wait to get out of this restaurant. I don't care if they want me to be GM. I don't want to be GM. Being the GM of a Stars is not my life's ambition. I hope university positions open up. No one is willing to retire, and by the time they do, I won't be qualified any longer and need to recertify. Professorship/teaching. If you don't have relevant field experience and aren't a recent graduate, you are less likely to get a position. Nothing new or unique I'd want to read back and reference in the future there, so let's just get to the spooky stuff. Stars had the car tonight, so I had to bike to work. Biking 3 miles downhill on the way back isn't as bad as uphill on the way there, so whatever. The last 1.5 miles home after the hill is parallel to the river before you cross the bridge into Stars. I was on that path and looking at the river. It's pretty well lit after the city improvements last year, and I could see pretty far out. It's typically relaxing to watch on my way home. Of course, tonight there was a kraken or something, so not as relaxing. The river is very wide and deep here, omitting some information here as it deals with historical events that would divulge the location of the town. But without too many details, at one point in history, ocean-faring boats could come up to this point of the river for trading purposes. It was their last port inland, though. Whatever it was crested the water. The lights I just mentioned lighting things up pretty well didn't do much here, due to the angle. Its head and tail were shadowed, so I could mainly only see the body of it. It looked bluish, greenish, grayish, although due to the lighting, who knows. I saw fins all over the body, haphazardly thrown in like surrealistic art. There were tentacles too, like someone grafted a squid onto it. I'm glad I couldn't see the head. This was already nightmare fuel. It dove back down quickly, and I decided to go off the trail onto the hot top instead, deciding I would rather risk cars than that thing. July stars. I was driving home from class tonight and I saw it. Personal growth. I was a night class instructor, not a student. I went out to view the downed trees after yesterday's storm since I was still without power. Like most of the state, it was next to the speed limit sign by the church, gripping a power line pole, so I knew it was about half a mile away. A vaguely humanoid shape, dark and indistinct, with 3 more arms than anything on 2 legs should have. The face was unclear except for amazingly white pupilless eyes. Bright like bleached teeth, power coruscated up its arms. White and blue electricity feeding to where its face should be. Based on where I saw them in comparison to the sign, it was next to, and the distance, I think it was between 14 and 18 feet tall. I noped and backed out. I'm glad this shit only happens every few years now, but I would rather it be done. No one else sees these things. Why me? 6/6/2022. I was driving home late at night with my wife after visiting some friends. I want to say around 11 p.m. or so, but that's a little fuzzy. We weren't really checking the time. I saw something in the road. I don't know what. I got the impression it was bipedal and large. It was either black or so dark it would be indistinguishable at night. By large, I mean tall and thick. Long legs, 2 long arms, and a chest that would put a mature oak to shame. I did not get the impression of any hair on it. It felt sharp, not fuzzy around the edges like you might get with something furry. It didn't light up correctly in my headlights, almost like the light didn't want to touch it. You would think that with the supernatural events I have seen from the road, I would be more cautious, but I wasn't. I probably shouldn't be too hard on myself. Events like this are rare and years apart. It's easy to get complacent. I swerved to miss the thing and hit a tree. I checked back to see if it would involve itself in our accident further, but it was completely gone. Not a trace. We weren't going too fast, so all that happened was some body damage to the car, a shattered windshield due to some branches, and us being knocked around a bit. There was something mechanical with the engine as well. The shop is going to look tomorrow, but I couldn't get it to turn over again, so we couldn't drive off. Wife was okay, but her phone was thrown free from the car. She had been using it when this all happened, so she didn't see it either. I ended up telling her it was a deer in the road. She found her phone, but the screen was shattered, as it hit the same tree we did. Mine didn't fare better in my pocket as I was slammed around in my seat. My airbag did not deploy, and I was pretty lucky to just bang around a bit. It did aggravate my knee to the point I couldn't walk though. And with both our phones out of commission, it meant she had to walk to the gas station, which was a quarter mile or so. I wasn't worried about the thing going after her. It disappeared and none of these other things I had seen before seemed interested in attacking people. After she was gone, I heard it though. A voice called to me. I can't describe it. The sounds it made had never existed before it had made them. And the words don't exist to describe them. If you have read The Color Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft, you will know that sometimes you simply can't describe something. Imagine a color that has never been seen before and try to describe it. You won't be able to. Try to explain non-Euclidean geometry, or what the fifth dimension looks like to human eyes, not graphs. You won't be able to. There are concepts your mind just can't process because it wasn't built for them. These sounds, this voice was among them. I will never forget what it said. Those eyes, not you. Stars. Reclaim glorious agony, followed by madness-inducing laughter that was tinged with a color never seen by humans before. The geometry so alien Lovecraft couldn't conceive them either. Each word was said as if it were from a language never conceived and long dead. There were seconds and years between each word, the syllables echoing the rise and falls of civilizations, human and alien. This short sentence took 30 seconds and 3,000 years to say. I passed out at this point, my mind a gibbering mess, refusing to even try further. A broken thing looking to find a cave to hide in and lick its wounds. I woke up in an ambulance. I was at the scene. I could see a wrecker getting in my car and my wife hovering with worry. I didn't feel great, but my mind wasn't shutting down to protect itself from intrusion any further, so I accepted that as a win and took a ride to the ER where they gave me the all clear. I decided, after this event, that it was time to tell my story. Most poignantly, it was because for the first time in my life, the story changed. I'm too old for this, and never, and I mean never in all these years, has anything I have seen made noise. Never a splash, a creak, a groan, a mumble, a whisper. Nothing. A void of sound, but now they have a voice. I am terrified. I hope it's years, or never, before I see or hear something again. I need to find a place to post this and get the message out. End of entries. It all started when I lost my job at the hotel. I was late a few times, and even though I had good reasons, the point system management used didn't care. I started applying to more fulfilling jobs. I tried art studios and local bookshops, just trying to find something I might actually enjoy. After a couple of weeks of random interviews that always ended in rejection emails, I got desperate. Rent was due. I saw a post on Craigslist for a local pub called Carter's. The pay was good for the job, and I'd get tips as a bartender. I applied. Dan called me the next morning. He sounded nice enough, and after a quick phone interview, I was hired. He was the owner and only employee of Carter's. So, is your last name Carter? I had asked. No, actually. I just thought it sounded legit, he responded. I laughed at his little joke, but I wondered why he picked that name, if it wasn't a last name. I guess everyone would just assume it was, and he was okay with that. My first shift was the very next night. I entered the dimly lit bar, and it was average. Green lights hung from the ceiling, there was a bar in the back, booths along the walls, and some tables and chairs here and there to fill the extra space. Dan was behind the bar. He waved at me as I walked towards him. I noticed he wore a glove on his left hand, maybe an offensive knuckle tattoo. Sylvia, welcome, he smiled. This is Carter's. We don't get very busy, but it's steady. We close at midnight. All you need to do is stay up here. Don't worry about the back. I'll handle everything there. You can put your purse down here. He gestured to a cabinet below the bar. You said you bartended before. Yes, before my last job. I told him as I shoved my purse below the bar, along with my water bottle. I know most drinks, and anything I don't remember, I'll Google and remember soon. Dan smiled at that and said, I love a quick learner. After that, he stalked to the back. He was right. They were never busy. A steady but slow flow of people came in and out. I never felt overwhelmed by the amount of drinks I had to make. It was easy and people tipped well. Dan mostly kept to himself unless we needed something from the back. He'd always get it quickly, and honestly, I thought he was really helpful and easy to work with. I always had to bring a jacket to work. It was cold in there. Even though I never really heard the AC going. Maybe that's why Dan always wore that glove. But then again, just his left hand? Whatever. Not my business. Months go by and I am making my rent. I'm never there past midnight when we close. Dan did all the cleaning and closing duties himself. He lived in an apartment above the pub, he said. And he didn't mind the extra work, especially since I didn't get tips after close. I didn't complain. The only thing I didn't like was that I had to take all of my breaks out front. It's like I wasn't allowed in the back. I tried to go out the back door for a cigarette one night when we were particularly slow. I didn't make it 2 steps before Dan rounded the corner. He looked sweaty, despite how cold the bar was. Hey, I just wanted to take my break, I had said, but Dan wasn't pleased. Use the front door, he said curtly. It's a mess back here. No need for you to see it. As he led me back out, I noticed a padlock on the freezer. Weird, but I let it go. Maybe the man had some of his own stuff in here. He did live right above here after all. Maybe he just wanted to work alone back here and not be bothered. I immediately felt bad. I'm sorry, Dan. I told him once we closed the door. I didn't want to lose this job for a stupid mistake. He paid me more than he should have, honestly. He gave me a smile and said, No worries. You'll get trained to work back there one day, but right now it's a total mess and I have to clean it up. Just use the front door for your breaks, okay? And I did. I didn't step foot in the back again. Things went really smoothly after that. Dan was a nice boss and didn't care if I was late here and there as long as I got there, and did what needed to be done. One night, exactly 3 months after I started working at Carter's, Dan seemed unwell. He was coughing and had gloves on both hands. Are you okay? I asked. I could close up and you can go upstairs and rest. He was below the bar restacking napkins and other items. No thanks, Sylvia, he said. I'll be okay. Dan, why do you close at midnight? We could make more if we hired someone else and stayed open later, I said, trying to make conversation. I like this job. It was real and logical suggestion. That's an idea. He laughed. It ended in a cough. I'll think on it. He stood up, his keys jingling in his pocket. I think I'll close a little early tonight. You wipe down the counter and head out? I looked around the empty bar and nodded. Honestly, I just wanted Dan to rest. He looked bad. I didn't even think about the gloves. It has to be because it's so damn cold. I did as he said and pulled my phone from my pocket. The bus didn't run yet, and it was early. I called my friend Stephanie to see if she wanted to get drinks somewhere. She agreed eagerly and came to pick me up. A few hours later, it was 2 a.m. Our Uber dropped Stephanie off first and then me. The car waited on the street as I walked up to my front door, my hands searching for my keys. They were gone. I must have left them at Carter's because I left my purse at the front of the club Stephanie and I went to. So I know they didn't fall out while I was dancing. I pulled out my phone. I was a little drunk at this point, but functional. I texted Dan. Hey, you still up? I think I left my keys below the bar. I need them. I know you're sick. I'm sorry. Hey, yeah, they are here. I just went and checked. Come on and get them. He usually sounded nicer, even via text, but he must have felt like shit. I hated bothering him, but I had a dog in my apartment I needed to feed. I stalked back to the Uber and gave him the address for Carter's. He didn't care as he was getting an even bigger tip now. We pulled up and told the Uber to wait for me. I tried the door, and it was unlocked. I opened it and stepped inside. My first red flag should have been how my breath frosted in the air. Then the light. The blue-green light coming from the small window on the door to the back. Dan? I called. No answer came. I went behind the bar shivering and checked the cabinet. No keys. I called for Dan again and heard a groan. It was coming from behind the door. My worry for Dan in this icy place trumped my weird vibes I had. My body seemed to be screaming at me to leave. Something felt wrong. As I pushed the door open, I saw the light was coming from the freezer. How did it fill the entire pub? Dan was lying on the floor, blood coming from the corner of his mouth. Dan! I yelled, running to him. Sylvia! He smiled. Thank God you're here. What happened? Are you okay? What's that? I began to gesture towards the freezer, but he stopped me. Help me up, he said, and I'll show you. Was this a fever dream? What was going on? I reached for his right hand, still gloved, and as I did, his left hand shot out faster than a half-frozen bloody man's hand should have. Something sharp hit my thigh. I gasped and jumped backward, hitting the wall. What the fuck, Dan? I screamed. A small needle jutted out from my leg. I didn't try and remove it. It felt deep. Sylvia? He said, standing on his own. He wiped the blood from his mouth on his sleeve and went towards the freezer door. As he opened it, the light blinded me. Was I asleep? I had to be. I felt more drunk than I did before I arrived here. Inside, I saw 6 light blue ovals. Large, shiny. The light was coming from these things. Dan propped the door open and came to my side. I'm not going to hurt you again, he whispered. That was necessary. I'm sorry. I was too weak to protest. My back hurt from where I hit the wall. My thigh hurt. My head spun from the alcohol, I thought. He helped me up. He was all gentle hands. He led me to the freezer. The ovals were gelatinous, not frozen. They were pulsing. What are these? I asked. Eggs. My eggs. I didn't lay them, of course, but they're mine. Dan frowned. I'm sick, Sylvia. Who will guard them when I die? Die? Dan, what are you? I stopped. He was taking off his gloves. His hands were black at the tips and slowly changed to a blue, then to his flesh tone as it went up his arm. I'm dying, he whispered. I need you to look after them for me. I stared in stunned silence. Suddenly, all at once, fear entered my body. Was the needle drugged? Why was I listening to this insanity? I stepped away from Dan and grabbed the needle. I took a deep breath and ripped it from my thigh. It was long and deep. I gasped at the pain. It barely made a noise as it clattered to the floor. I'm leaving, I said, limping as fast as I could to the door. Sylvia, wait, Dan said. I don't know why, but I did. Your keys. He reached in his pocket and pulled out my keys. He stole them. I snatched them out of his black hand and ran, ignoring the pain, to the front door. The Uber was still waiting. I got in and told him to go. I clutched my leg but tried to hide it from view. I got home, went inside, and locked my door. I put a chain under the handle for good measure. Going to the shower and peeling off my jeans revealed a small puncture wound, but barely any blood. Good. I put the water as hot as it would go. I couldn't sleep that night. My brain was full of fractured images of those eggs, whatever they were. They weren't frozen despite the cold. What were they? They looked firm but like jello at the same time. And what was wrong with Dan? His eggs? I've never seen anything like that. Weeks have gone by and Dan texts me once a day. Please, Sylvia, you don't get it. I thought I could trust you. Until one day they stopped. I've been a recluse since that night Dan stabbed me with a needle, but my dreams remain haunted by the eggs. Every time I close my eyes, I no longer see darkness. I see that cold light. 3 days after Dan's last text, I risked leaving the house. I drove by Carter's and it was closed despite it being the busiest hour we had usually. I walked around back and noticed the back door was ajar. Thankfully, I went inside. I live in Dan's apartment now. I run Carter's. I take care of the eggs. That's my life. I rehomed my dog and cut my lease short at my old apartment. Don't get me wrong, I loved my dog, but I couldn't risk it. When I came in that night, what I saw will always haunt me. Dan, half absorbed into one of the light blue eggs. The inside was tinted red with his blood. It was weird, but I felt proud. Like a mom who got her kids to eat a food they normally refused. A note was taped to the door of the freezer. Instructions. Sylvia, thank you. Close at midnight. They get colder after about 1 a.m. Too cold to justify to customers. Don't spend too much time with them. You will want to. I know you will. I could feel how maternal you were from our first phone call, but you'll get sick. Keep them safe. I only hired you because I knew I wouldn't last much longer. Don't make my mistakes. Dan. I follow these rules. I run the bar, but when I close at midnight, I can't help but sit with them for a bit. Sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes 20. I wear a hoodie and bring a blanket so I can stay longer. I love them. They fill every second of my dreams. I don't know what they will be if they hatch. But I know I love them. Sometimes the men that hit on me a little too aggressively while I bartend end up back there too. Dan left me a stash of needles that makes most people willing to listen long enough for me to knock them out. Try to feed them equally. Sometimes hacking a man into 6 pieces so they can all get some. I don't know if they need it, but they seem happier, brighter. Besides, I've only started to cough a little. It's worth it. My father was a troubled man. He bounced from juvie to boys' homes after being raised by an alcoholic father and an absent mother. He faced unspeakable horrors at the hands of his deadbeat dad. He did better than his dad did with him, but there's only improvement where my grandfather's parenting style is concerned. So he essentially terrorized us too, but less so. He had his demons, and that much was apparent growing up. My father turned to drinking and eventually opiates to ease the trauma of his early life, which only compounded his already erratic behavior. He did all manner of things while under the influence of whatever it was he was ingesting that day. Once he barricaded himself in the house while my mom and I were out shopping with my siblings. We came home to find him brandishing a weapon, screaming about how they were after him and it wasn't safe for us. My mom sent me in because he listened to me better, and thus began my lifelong career of talking my dad out of his near consistent crises. One by one, he abused them, and one by one, they left. All except me. It had been my job to care for him after all. It was my responsibility to see him through it all, even at the expense of my own safety. Then the big day came. After 25 years of tumultuous marriage, my mom finally left. I breathed a sigh of relief as she frantically gathered her things with the help of a police escort, and my coaching of my dad to stay calm. I drove with my mom as she fled across the country to escape his clutches, all the while on the phone with my dad, dodging his every question about her whereabouts. Thankfully, the drugs kept him from putting two and two together that I wasn't present for the same amount of time my mom was on the run. When I finally did return home, he asked again where my mom was. "I don't know, Dad. She hasn't spoken to me since she stopped speaking to you," I said. He just spoke one word: traitor, and shut the door in my face. I kept on with my life. I worked, I ate, I shit, lather, rinse, and repeat. I went on like this for weeks. Finally, I got concerned. I took it upon myself to stop by the house. As I pulled up to the imposing block and wrought iron fence, I could feel the despondent quality of the atmosphere wash over me before I even entered. But something else was off. The lawn hadn't been watered or mowed in an indeterminate amount of time. The exterior of the house was dusty. All of the curtains were drawn. My parents were always good at keeping up appearances. You would have never been able to guess the horrors lurking inside the house just from looking at it. From the perfectly manicured lawn to the immaculate and spotlessly clean interior. They never allowed their children to look even slightly disheveled in hopes that no one would be able to guess the manner of unspeakable abuse we had to endure. On multiple occasions, we were kicked out of the house on a hot summer day, with no shoes, no food, and no water. We were ordered to stay away from the house for an unknown amount of time so Mom and Dad could talk. When we were finally allowed back in, Mom was withdrawn. Her tear-streaked face pointed to the ground, afraid to make a sound so as to not give away her imperfect life she had worked so hard to upkeep the illusion didn't exist. A piece of furniture was suspiciously removed after each of these talks, most likely broken from the impact of my mother's body. And afterwards, my mom's body was all different shades of yellow, purples, and greens. But we never spoke of it. None of us spoke of the personalized abuse we endured separately from each other. The only conversation my mom and I ever had about our shared/separate nightmare was one night in particular. We both got up from our respective beds around 2:30 a.m. We were both scared, without any knowledge why. And we both laid on each couch without a word to each other. We laid in silence for about a half hour until our fear mounted in terror. I heard grunting and thumping coming from my parents' room next door. We held hands in the dark, praying a silent plea of protection to whatever higher powers that be. We slept, holding on to each other, and we awoke to the sun rising. Surprised surviving the night, we both commiserated on our shared experience. I felt as though there was pure evil in the next room, my parents' room. I felt as though there were demons crawling up the walls, and if we moved even a millimeter, we would be facing a fatal consequence. My mom instructed me to go into the room and check on my father because I could handle him better. I walked in to find my dad fully clothed, lying on top of the bed sheets, surrounded by scraps of paper and plastic and fabric. As it turns out, my dad had spent the night cutting up my mom's clothing, shredding all of her credit cards and identification documents, and discounting the alarm system which conveniently had a panic button in the hallway next to the living room. I believe that the only reason we survived that night was due to our silent prayers. I shook myself out of my daydream. Nightmare. I reinforced my courage and steeled myself to make the short walk up the driveway to the house. I didn't have any house keys because my father never allowed anyone to have access to his house, and feared that we would allow a stranger to come in and ransack the place, or that we would lose them in some parking lot, and a criminal would be able to trace the generic master key back to him and come commit some unspeakable crime against him. The mind of childhood trauma speaks a different language than we do, I guess. As I walked up the driveway, the house seemed to breathe. I could feel warmth and anger radiating from it. The imposing archway stood before me. I just had to walk underneath it. Right, just walk underneath it. Simple. One final deep inhale to boost my courage and confidence, and I did just that. I knocked on the door. No answer. No noise came from inside the house. I knocked again, but louder. Nothing. I pushed the button for the doorbell, and as the Westminster chime rang, I saw movement in the curtains. As I walked over to see, it was my father, peeking through them, probably in some state of paranoia. I was greeted by a pair of emerald green eyes that met my own. I jumped back in shock. What was that? I half screamed. Then came our family cat, clawing at the window. She was frantic. Her usual fluffy white cheeks were sunken, and her body looked as if it hadn't seen a meal in days. This is when I knew something was deeply wrong. While my father was a monster to us, that cat was his pride and joy. She followed him everywhere. If I was good at talking him down from the ledge, she was a savant. Emma, the cat, was a long-haired, mute calico cat who spent her days living in the sun, being pampered by my father. All of us loved her, but there was an underlying jealousy there, because we knew that my dad was capable of being tender and loving to something. Turns out it just wasn't us. I tapped on the window and said, "It's okay, Emma. I'll come get you soon." And with that, I picked up my phone. I didn't know who I would call. I started with the police departments. Nothing. Then the morgues. Still nothing. And finally, after about the third hospital, I got a hit. He was there. They quickly connected me to his room after a brief shuffle of surprised, overlapping voices. I can only assume that he wasn't exactly a walk in the park during his hospital stay, and no one else had made any calls concerning him. "Hello?" His husky voice spoke through the receiver. "Dad, are you okay?" I replied. "Rach, is that you?" "Yeah, Dad, it's me. I'm coming to see you. Just stay put, I guess." I arrived at the hospital room about 30 minutes later. As I walked into the room, I was overwhelmed with the sweet, sickly smell of a person who is actively dying. My nostrils were filled with the musky odor of kidney disease mixed with the sterile cleaning products used in a hospital. He looked like hell, too. His skin was swollen and discolored. He had a greasy yellow pallor to him. The whites of his eyes were ringed blood red, and his irises were shrouded in the telltale yellow jaundice of renal failure. The next few minutes were a whirlwind of activity. Doctors and nurses came through. I don't remember most of it, but I do remember hearing words like end-of-life care and dialysis. There were lots of sympathetic pats on the shoulders, and then it stopped. I was given a pile of pamphlets to read, and the room was still again. I looked at my dad and asked, "How long have you been here?" "Couple days, maybe a week," he said. "Has anyone been feeding Emma? Why didn't you call?" I replied, "Nah, Emma's fine, I'm sure. Don't know why I didn't call, just didn't." He replied back. After nearly an hour of convincing, I finally got his keys back from him. After much reassurance of, "No, I won't lose them. No, I won't let anyone else in. And no, I won't allow some machete-wielding maniac to steal your stuff," he finally relented, and the only thing that really convinced him was the concern for that goddamn cat. I went back to the house and awaited further instructions. As I entered the house, the stillness startled me. There was always something going on here. Some kind of hustle and bustle of day-to-day life. Whether it was arguing and objects clattering in the aftermath, or my mom frantically keeping the house as spotless as possible, there was always something. The only thing that stirred was the urging of Emma, letting me know that the food bowl had been empty for quite some time, and that the crystal glass on my father's nightstand she drank from had long run dry. I dutifully gave her food and water and took a look around. All the curtains were drawn, and every light in the house was off. There were scent plugs, ins, and all around the house, which were most likely put there to mask the sickness that hung over the place. But the scent of manufactured lavender was overwhelming, combined with the stale air inside the house. Cheap plastic vodka bottles littered the countertops. Stacks and stacks of mail was piled up. I looked at one. Bill's. Mom had always kept the finances on track, so I'm sure he was behind. He had always hid his drinking, but I guess he didn't feel the need to do that with everyone gone, so he must have gone on one hell of a bender. After the years of abuse to his liver, I guess this one final bender did him in. My phone rang, shocking me out of my reverie. Hello? I answered. Hey, Rach. They want to send me home. It was my dad. What? But I thought there was all that talk of hospice and dialysis. I replied, shocked. Just come get me, he screamed on the other end. I'm sure Emma is missing me and I want to get out of here. So I did. I'm sure he left that hospital AMA, but I can only assume he was a huge pain in the ass while he was there, and they were only happy to get rid of him. As I pulled up to the entrance, he sat alone in a wheelchair parked outside the doors. They had rolled him out there and left him to sit alone to wait to be picked up. Classic dad move. Except he had ran these people off in record time. I brought him home and did my best to make him comfortable. I didn't know what I was doing or even how to care for him in this state, but I kept hearing the words overland over in my mind. You know how to deal with him. So I guess it was my job. I knew none of my siblings would come to his aid, and I wouldn't dream of asking my mom to come back after her harrowing escape. So it was up to me. Tall order for someone who had just turned 18, but my mom didn't raise a quitter. After he was settled in, the house was cleaned up, the cat fed, and his medications administered. I got a call. Teenage me still had obligations, right? You want to come watch a movie with me? I heard the warmth of my best friend's voice over the phone. Uncertainly, I replied, sure. Just give me a few minutes and I'll be over. I hung up and checked on my dad. He was sleeping fitfully, but sleeping. I whispered, Hey Dad, I'm gonna go watch a movie tonight. I won't be gone long. He sputtered out a weak, okay. And I left. The night went on as usual. I filled my friend in on the happenings with my mom leaving and my dad apparently dying. She offered her support and we settled in to watch Thor. Somewhere along the way, I fell asleep. I woke in a panic to sunshine filtering in. I got home as fast as I could. I frantically began doing whatever monotonous household chores I could think of to stave off his anger at me, being out all night without asking. And then I remembered. He is a dying man in the next room. A dying man that I'd better go check on. I tiptoed into his room, still afraid at his reaction, although I knew there wasn't much he could do. The man could barely walk, but old habits die hard, I guess. He wasn't in his bed. I kept walking into his room, a room I was so rarely allowed in. I felt like I was committing a crime just being in there. And then I saw him. He was lying face down, the cat lying at his feet. As I got closer, I saw that his head was wedged between his large wooden nightstand and his bed frame. His arm was bent upwards with the bed sheet still clutched tight in his hands, as if he were trying to get himself back up off the ground. His other arm lay at his side, I rushed to his side and slammed my palm into his back repeatedly, as you would a choking toddler. Hollow. I went to his ankles to try and pull him out from between the furniture. My hands clasped around his swollen, purple ankles. As I gripped, my fingers left deep impressions in his ankles, as if he were made of Play-Doh. Cold. He was cold. My last resort, I moved the nightstand away from his head and tried to roll him on his back. His body stayed rigid and in the exact same position it had been as it was resting against the bed. Arm bent, face down on the carpet, his face kept the same shape as it had been while smashed against the floor. Blood poured from his mouth, eyes, nose, and ear closest to the ground, and the blood inside his body had pooled to the lowest point, leaving his disfigured face swollen and purple. His clouded eyes stared at me as if to say, "You let me die alone." I left him there, face down. My only option was to dial 911. I could barely hear the dial tone of the phone. It sounded like someone far away was talking to me. 911, what is the location of your emergency? Hello, 911, where are you located? I heard the sudden hiss of air escaping lungs. My head snapped over to my father a few feet away. Was he breathing? No. I checked for a pulse. I could hear cracking as I watched his head begin to turn. I clutched the phone at my side, operator still calling out for someone. His head turned and turned until it faced me directly. The bones snapped and tendons groaned in protest. Then he began to stand, still in the same position as before. He rose in irregular, jerking motions. He grunted and gurgled at me. I stood motionless, unable to move or make a sound out of pure terror. He began to make his way towards me, the swollen, discolored thing that was once my father, his arms still bent, face still smashed and purple with coagulated blood gathered around it. He twitched and jolted his disfigured body towards me. The room grew dark with evil. The walls faded away until it felt like they were 1,000 miles, displaced in every direction. I was surrounded by an immeasurable darkness. And then he stopped. He spoke with several voices behind his own, high-pitched, bass-toned, childlike, and he said 2 words, "You traitor." Then my trance was broken, and the fear that had rendered me immobile just moments before had lent me the strength to run. He screamed after me, but I ran. I kept running. I don't remember much after that, but I do know that police showed up. I know his body was hauled away, and I know I moved out of state shortly after that. My life since then has been a series of waiting rooms and therapists, talking and talking and talking. They seem to believe what I went through was some sort of stress-induced psychosis, and I choose to believe them. It's much easier than believing that any of that was actually real. I don't know if it's true, but I do know that on nights when I'm alone and the house is dark, I'll see him, the gnarled and deformed shape of my dead father, lurking to get revenge on his traitor of a daughter. Maybe one day he might get me, or maybe this is his form of revenge. Who knows? About 20 years ago, I got a job at a new laboratory complex that had just finished construction. I was fresh out of the university and was excited to work with fellow science-loving individuals in such a fresh complex. The whole complex was built some 10 miles outside the town I lived at. It was in a remote location completely surrounded by a thick forest. It was built above a small coal mine which was shut down after the mining company went bankrupt. The moment I set foot into the complex, I felt uneasy about the place. At first, I shrugged it off as a strange butterfly of excitement. But even after months of working there, it never went away. The company in charge of the complex was shady in the best meaning of the word. The first month, I mostly worked in and near the reception desk, dealing with paperwork of arriving shipments of scientific equipment and raw materials. I was told that this was to make sure I'm trustworthy. Some would have quit after a week or two, but I was assured that soon enough, they'll come to a verdict and I'll be able to use my knowledge to advance science. One early morning, a shipment came in that wasn't in the schedule. My boss just told me not to worry, as the schedule might be incorrect, and told me to have the crates taken to Wing 4. While I waited for the facility's transport truck to come around, I started to wonder what the crates had in them, since the logistics schedule usually lists the contents. Normally, the large metal crates contain refrigerated goods like plant samples, so I figured there was no harm in checking. I barely got a peek into the crate when my boss walked in and fired me on the spot. He refused to tell me why I was fired, since we are usually allowed to check the crates unless instructed otherwise. I walked home that day sad but relieved, since I didn't have to be in that unnerving place ever again. In the following 20 years, I got a new job on the other side of the country, got married, and had kids. I'd almost forgotten that old complex for good, if it hadn't driven the gravel road leading up to the complex while visiting some old friends at that town. This prompted me to look up the complex on the internet. It turned out that about 6 years after I departed, the company in charge got under fire for not following safety guidelines. The whole facility was shut down after a handful of employees went missing, and the CEO of the company took their own life. Being adventurous, I rang my friends and asked if they wanted to go and explore the complex. Out of the 6 of us, 2 immediately declined, as they had heard stories of weird stuff going on in the complex and didn't like the thought of going missing. Looking back to that moment, I was stupid. I fell right into the horror movie trope of exploring the creepy location, even when there was concrete evidence that something wasn't right over there. I suppose I thought that fate would protect the fools like me. So it was the 4 of us. Me, Jonathan, Michael, and Brent. We met at Brent's house to prepare us. Because a section of the complex was now underwater, Jonathan brought 2 sets of scuba gear. Since I am the same length as he is, it was decided that I would get the second set in case we want to explore the underwater section. We also packed headlamps and handheld flashlights for everyone, plus some heavy-duty walkie-talkies in case we were separated. As I was the only person to have worked there, I advised to bring along a Geiger counter or 2 just to be safe. We then loaded everything in my car and headed to the complex. Arriving at the main gates, I was surprised to not have that odd feeling like I did when I worked here 20 years ago. Since the gates were chained shut, we left the car behind and walked the rest of the way. The fence already had holes in them, so we definitely weren't the first ones around. It was at this point when I turned the Geiger counter on. It helped a little. It picked up normal background radiation. At least we now knew that it worked. Walking around in this complex was cooler than I thought. It was interesting to see how much nature had taken over in 20 years. Most of the place was trashed, probably by all the people who came here before us or by the employees when the place shut down. There was one place I wanted to really see with my own eyes, something I wasn't able to see back in the day. It was the 4th wing. The 4th wing was where all the classified experiments happened. I knew that the wing was probably as empty as the rest of the complex, but my childish curiosity wanted to see what it was all about. The wing was built into a large trench-like hole in the ground. This hole had been filled with rainwater after multiple floods occurred in the area, and most of the wing was underwater. Jonathan and I went back to the car and got ourselves into our scuba gear while Brent and Michael stayed behind to look for a good entrance into the 4th wing. We regrouped at the central square, and the 2 led me and Jonathan through the complex to the lowest floor not to be underwater. There was a stairwell leading down which was almost completely full of water besides a small section at the very top. Jonathan and I checked the tanks and then hopped in. The water was cold, so we swam fast to get some warmth into our bodies. We soon reached the bottom of the stairwell. Our plan was to start from the bottom and go upward floor by floor, swimming together to make sure we don't lose each other. Most of everything was damaged beyond recognition by the water. If there were any documents here, they are definitely gone by now. We eventually reached the large cargo elevator. For the heck of it, I tried to pull open the doors. They moved slightly. Jonathan realized what I tried to do and came to help. We got the doors open enough to get through and noticed that the elevator shaft goes down a lot further than it should. There was at least 3 more floors down there. Jonathan gestured to me if we should head down. I was hesitant at first, but we went anyways. I was mostly worried about the water pressure more than anything, but Jonathan was an experienced diver, so I figured he knew what we were capable of doing. I gestured him to lead the way, and followed him. We went all the way to the bottom and pried the door open. This is where the strange feeling I had all those years ago came back. Beyond the elevator door was an airlock. It was almost like the designers knew that this place would flood. We got the door open and closed the door after us. The airlock had a lever with instructions to pull when the airlock gets filled with water. It seemed like a stupid idea since the place was without electricity, but I pulled the lever. Miraculously, the water started to flow away, and soon we were able to open the other airlock door. The air was stale but breathable. At least there was no water. We tried to radio the folk upstairs, but nothing. The amount of water and concrete above us must have been blocking the signal. I had also brought the Geiger counter with us. It now was beeping a bit more intensely. Nothing that could harm us, but definitely higher than the average background radiation. Along the wall was written, Taurus Complex, Wing 4, Section 31. Jonathan had started exploring the nearby rooms, so I did too. I quickly found a large library of files. All of the filing cabinets were for a single project. Most projects even had a second cabinet. I picked the one closest to me and opened it. The tag on the cabinet simply read, Project Skygate. They were trying to build small-scale particle accelerators to then use to teleport physical matter from one point to another. It mostly seemed like theoretical work, though. The second cabinet read, Project Grey Wooliner. The head of the project was the company's CEO himself. It seemed like they tried to do genetic experiments on living beings. At first starting with rats, but soon testing on sheep, and eventually on human volunteers. Around this point, I was interrupted by Jonathan. He asked me to follow him and keep an eye on the rads per minute as we were going along. I took the file I was reading with me and followed Jonathan. The rads increased as we were walking. We eventually got to a large door made of steel and concrete. The text on it was scuffed beyond recognition, but there was something I clearly could read. A black trefoil within a yellow ring. The radiation warning symbol. Hesitantly, we opened the heavy door and found ourselves above a compact nuclear fission reactor. It was nothing massive, but definitely powerful enough to power the entire wing. We agreed that we should probably leave it alone. There's no way of telling how much damage the reactor has taken in the past 2 decades. We left the reactor chamber and closed the door. Jonathan went to look around a bit more while I went to look if any of the lights work, as we hadn't really checked them before. I returned to the library and tried the light switch. It worked. I found a desk and a chair in the corner, so I sat down and radioed Jonathan to let him know my whereabouts. This is what I heard in response. I hear you, Patrick. I just found some cages. One of them seems to be smashed to pie. And then I heard tumbling and a scream. And transmission end. Jonathan? Jonathan! I screamed into the walkie-talkie. I got no response. My fight or flight sense triggered. I started panicking. I jumped up from the chair and bolted across the corridor into a storage, looking for something to defend myself from whatever just attacked Jonathan. I found a large hydraulic piston, tested the weight, and then started to sneak around the corridors. I had no idea what I should do besides look for Jonathan. I probably should have ran to the airlock and escaped, but it felt wrong to leave him behind. I had reached the point where we split up when I heard footsteps, loud and slow footsteps, echoing through the corridor. I went and hid behind a door. It could have been Jonathan, or it could have been the thing that attacked him. I couldn't tell who or what it was since it was dark, but whatever it was, it passed me without issue. As soon as I heard it take a corner, I bolted out and started looking for Jonathan. I soon found the room he was talking about. It was filled with multiple cages, almost like cells. One of these cells had the bars bent and twisted. By the way they were moved, it was caused by something on the inside. I found Jonathan groaning by the wall. He had hit the concrete wall with his head so hard that he was bleeding. "It's human, but not," he said before passing out. I checked his pulse. It was erratic and he was bleeding badly. I looked around for something to help him, bolting across the corridor as quietly as I could. I happened to find some old rolls of bandages and cloth towels. I went back to him, set the towel at the wound, and secured it by wrapping the bandages around his head. Then I heard the footsteps again. I was forced to leave him there and hide behind one of the cages. The thing stepped into the room. I heard it breathe heavily, then take a few steps towards my way. I was holding my breath to make sure I didn't make much noise, but the thing was in the room longer than I could handle. I had to breathe, but quietly. The echo of the room and my frightened exhale was too loud. The next thing I heard was loud stomping towards me. I ran towards the corridor. I heard the loud clang of the metal cage. I turned around and flicked on my flashlight. The thing matched Jonathan's description. It was human, but not. It was tall, at least 16 feet tall. Its posture was hunched, and its muscle mass was definitely enough to demolish a metal cage. Its eyes were sewed shut. The ears were disproportionately massive. I turned around and ran. I didn't care where. I just ran. The thing had issues with running in the tight halls, so I was able to outrun him. I found a small metal door, one that I hadn't seen before. I opened it and closed it after myself. The room I found myself in was a dead end. It was a server room. It was fully operational, just heavily outdated. I found a terminal to access and realized that there is still an internet connection, albeit a very slow one. The whole thing ran on Windows Vista, but I was able to get to grips with it enough to make myself a Reddit account and write this post. I have also read some of that file that I took with me. Although the first animal test proved successful, the first human test failed, killing the test subject. After 3 more deaths, a new gene therapy formula was formed, which meant that the second set of tests were a success. The subject seemed normal at first, but within the next 12 hours, his muscle mass, hearing, eyesight, and skeletal structure increased. 24 hours after that, the subject started to regard the scientists as inferior beings and became violent towards others. They tried to hinder him by removing his ability to see, but as the gene therapy was still actively changing the subject from the inside, the subject simply hyper-evolved to have better hearing. He was then put into a tungsten cage on the lowest level of the wing before his body became immune to the sedatives. In the cage, he grew in size and strength before breaking free and killing 8 scientists. The CEO blamed himself in the report and wrote a line at the bottom of the report. To the person reading this, you have either managed to take him down or you are actively hiding from him. If you are doing the latter, I'd advise you to pray to God for the last time. I have heard a couple of loud slams against the door. It seems to hold him for now. I'll probably die from hunger and thirst, or by him. Jonathan is most likely already dead. This isn't a plea for help, and for God's sake, don't come here to save us or you'll end up with us. I'm writing this mostly to Brent, Michael, to my family. Keep going without us. You're strong enough, but also remember us, and don't be as dumb like Jonathan and I, because it was our stupidity that got us killed. My name is Alice. I live in an old mill town in the north of England. It's not a bad place to live. You can own a home here and live pretty comfortably, quite cheaply compared to most places, but there's not much going on, and a lot of people find it boring. Most people with any sort of ambition leave to go to university and don't bother coming back. I love it here though. My little corner of town is a 10-minute walk to the woods and the countryside in one direction, and about a 30-minute walk to the town center in the other direction. My family are here too, and I love being able to pop into Grand's for a cup of tea and a chat, or wander round to my parents' where it still feels like home despite moving out years ago. When I was younger, I had big ambitions, and as I was a really bright kid, everyone expected me to go far, but I burned out between my GCEs and my A-levels and didn't end up going to uni. Although it was devastating at first, it actually made me realize that they were never my ambitions in the first place, more my parents' ambitions for me. My dream was to have a pleasant job that made enough to get by, marry someone who is my best friend, own our own house, make it a home, and be a mom. I met Jack when I was 21. He was quiet and awkward at first, but had the kindest eyes I've ever seen. We met through a friend on a night in the pub, and after a couple of drinks we got chatting. His kind eyes lit up and sparkled as he spoke. We chatted till the pub closed and the rest was history. We were never apart after that day. We married when I was 23, and bought a little house with a lovely little garden round the corner from my gran and 5 minutes down the road from my parents. George was born when I turned 25. He's a kind, thoughtful boy with my mess of ginger hair and his daddy's eyes. Ivy followed 3 years later, a bright, enchanting little girl with her daddy's dark hair and magic in her eyes. Lastly, there is little Teddy, who was born 3 years after Ivy. Teddy is an absolute delight, the double of his daddy, and adored by his older brother and sister. My cheeky boy. I've always said that 3 is a magic number. I love the bones of all my babies. They are all so different from each other, but they light up when they are together, and they balance each other out so well. I became a stay-at-home mom when George was about 2, so money was quite tight for a long time. But it was worth it to spend the time watching my babies grow and turn into marvelous little people, and they often told me they have the best mommy and daddy in the world. Was my life exciting? Not really, but it was bliss, and I loved it. When Teddy turned 3 just over a year ago, he started nursery, and I decided it was the perfect time to dip my toe back into the world of work. Nothing glamorous, just a part-time job in the library in town during school hours so that I could still be around for the kids, but we'd have more spare money to take them on a few adventures. Not long after I started working at the library, another new girl started on my shift. Her name was Ruby, and she wasn't from round here. She had no family or friends in the area either, and her accent was hard to place. At first I thought it was odd that she chose to move here with no ties to the place, but I soon forgot about that as we got on so well. Ruby and I spent more and more time together on our breaks, and walking to the bus stop together over the next few weeks. And then I started inviting her to our home. Jack and the kids all loved her. She was like a little sister I never had, and my kids saw her as an auntie. Me, Jack and the kids could never afford a holiday while I was a stay-at-home mom, so when we were finally able to book a week away at Cornwall over Easter, we were all over the moon. Ruby, however, was not happy for us. She was upset that we didn't invite her along. I explained that it was our first ever holiday as a family. We wanted it to just be us and the kids this time, but we should plan another in a few months for all of us. Ruby said that she understood, and I thought it was fine at first, but something about her had shifted. I couldn't put my finger on it, but things felt off. I convinced myself that I was just being paranoid and maybe feeling a bit guilty, and managed to push it out of my mind. Our holiday was perfect. Had campfires on the beach, spent ages exploring nature around the cottage and the history of the little villages nearby. By the end of the holiday, I was really looking forward to coming home and telling Ruby all about it. We arrived home on the Sunday evening, and I let her know we were home safe. She texted back to say that she couldn't wait to see me at work and catch up. When I arrived at work the following day, Ruby pretty much danced through the door, but I couldn't help noticing that she didn't look quite like herself. Her usual stylish blazer had been replaced with a chunky, hand-knitted cardigan, just like the ones my gran makes for me, and her diamond studs had been swapped for cheap silver dangly owls like mine. Weird, but whatever. By the next week, though, her whole look had changed. Her smart heels swapped for comfy brown boots, and her usual well-fitted jeans and smart top swapped for a bright knee-length dress. Now I'm all for an image overhaul, but she was dressed exactly like me, and I'm hardly the queen of style. It was really starting to freak me out, but when I mentioned it to Jack, he just laughed and said I was a trendsetter, and that I should be flattered. I shook off my unease and tried to see the funny side. I chatted to Ruby, lovingly teasing her about her new look, and she told me she just admired how I dressed to make me happy, and don't really bother with fashion, and she wanted to see how it felt. She also told me she'd been spending time with my gran while I was on holiday, and Gran had offered to knit her a cardigan. I thought it was actually lovely of her to keep my gran company, and sweet that she admired me. That weekend we spent time together as usual, and she came to my parents with us for a Sunday dinner. Although I've always been friendly with pretty much everyone where I live, I've not really had many close friends in years, so it was really nice finally finding someone who I felt so close to. Another week went by with things going great. I went to the kids' parents' evenings, which went amazingly, and we had a weekend of just me, Jack, and the kids chilling out at home, having living room picnics, and a lazy day, all piled up in our big bed watching films that me and Jack loved as kids. The following Monday, I got into work, and Ruby had cut her long blonde hair to a chin-length, messy bob, and dyed it the exact same shade of ginger as mine. Aside from being impressed at how natural the dye job looked, I was really freaked out now. This was beyond admiring my slightly odd dress sense. She looked like my clone. I decided then that it was best to stay friendly but start to distance myself a bit. Ruby called in sick the next day, and I was relieved. I hope she wasn't too sick, obviously, but it was nice to be the only me in the building again. She was off the rest of the week, too. And by Friday, the weirdness and unease was the furthest thing from my mind as I looked forward to the weekend with my family. That Friday feeling quickly disappeared when I got to the kids' school to pick them up, as the teachers looked at me confused and told me that their mom had collected them early. I felt sick. I tried to call Jack, but my calls went straight to voicemail, then tried my parents and my gran. None of them answered. I rang the police, who assured me they would send someone over as soon as they could, but it might take a couple of hours. Frustrated that it wasn't being treated as an emergency, and not knowing what else to do, I got a taxi to my parents' house as Jack would still be at work. As I made my way to the front door, I looked through the window and an overwhelming sense of relief washed over me as I saw my beautiful baby sat around the table with my parents. It must have been a misunderstanding, I thought to myself. Maybe the teachers meant my mom picked them up. I must have arranged it with mom and forgotten about it. That sweet, sweet relief was short-lived though, and quickly turned to dread as the next thing I saw was Jack walking into the room with his arm around Ruby, laughing as we always did as he kissed her on the forehead. Furiously, I banged on the window. My mom and dad quickly came outside. For a moment, I expected a gotcha and a hug as they laughed about pranking me, but nothing prepared me for their actual reaction. They looked at me like I was a stranger, asked what I thought I was playing at, and threatened to call the police if I didn't get off their property as I was scaring their grandchildren. I heard the kids crying for me and tried to run to them, but as I did, they ran to Ruby as she said, "Don't worry, sweethearts. Mommy won't let anyone get you." I ran home at this point feeling like my heart had been ripped out of my chest and absolutely terrified, but when I got there, my keys wouldn't work. I slept in the garage that night as the lock on the side door is broken, and in the morning, I walked as I tried to come up with a plan. People I've been friendly with for years no longer recognized me, and I tried every number in my phone, but the only person that answered was my best childhood friend who moved a couple hours away when she went to uni. I'm not sure she believes what happened, but she has let me stay at her place for a couple of weeks now. The police never came or called back when I called again to chase them up. They had no record of my original call. I thought about reporting it again, but with how people have been with me since then, I'm not sure it's the best course of action anymore. Has anybody ever heard of anyone with a similar experience? I need help to get my family and my life back. You know how that Phil Collins song is supposed to be about a man who saw someone drowning and didn't save them? I wasn't going to be that person who let someone die when I could have done something that night. I was sitting on my couch, exhaling smoke when the feeling came to me. I went numb and it felt like a movie was playing inside my head. I could see a man driving drunk on the highway outside my house. I could see him struggling to round the first corner you hit when you leave town. I could see him falling asleep. He wasn't going to make it much further. Bushy eyebrows, beard just starting to gray, a face hardened by tobacco, whiskey, and work. He looked like so many of the men I grew up with in rural Washington. I could even hear a static-choked Bob Seger song softly coming out of the speakers of his truck. I could see him drifting to the side of the road as he went up the long, flat, straight stretch of wet highway in front of my yard. He was going to crash and die. I could feel it in my bones. I ran out my front door and into the frigid sideways rain of a cold winter night. I could see the lights of a truck nearing on the highway. I ran out to the road and started waving at the truck as I watched it approach. I caught my breath as the truck slowed and stopped next to me. The man was perplexed when he saw me standing there in the rain by the side of the road, but I could see relief in his eyes. "Let me give you a ride home," I told him. His name was Tom. His son had died a year before from drugs. He was in a dark place. I got him home. It felt good. It happened again a few weeks later when I was sitting at home after getting dropped off by my friends after going to the bar. A few drinks deep, I was drifting around my house drunk and lonely. My mind raced to the inside of a cold, dark tool shed I had never seen before. I saw a frail woman, probably 60. She was setting something up in the rafters of the cold and dark shed. I couldn't see exactly what it was, but I had a sinister feeling about it. My mind then took me out of the shed, pulling away as if my field of vision was a camera on a track going backwards out of the space like in a movie. In a swift flash, I was off of her property and on a country road I recognized. I had driven by this woman's house before. It was a worn-out Rambler on the road behind the local garage. I could be there in less than 10 minutes. I got there in maybe 4 minutes. Racing up the wet road, I rushed into the woman's shed and found her standing on a stool, the noose in her hand. Her name was Linda. She was a widow who never had children. We talked. She promised me she wouldn't think about doing what she was going to do again. She wasn't actually going to do it anyways. I didn't believe her. You're probably wondering where this newfound condition came to me from. It was a simple answer to me. I had just moved into a new rental house, and on one end of the property was a cemetery. I swore it even had an underground power line that ran through it. I felt I had some odd, new energy coursing through me ever since I had moved in there. The premonitions felt like a dreadful curse at first. I would start to get a nauseous feeling in my stomach wherever they would come. I tried to fight them. Then I realized I could kind of become a real-life, small-town superhero, and I started to embrace them. I would sit at home waiting for something to come to me, hoping I would get to help someone that night. I saved a child from drowning. I put out a house fire before the sleeping family even knew their stove was about to burn down their home. I found a young boy who was lost in the woods and going to freeze to death. A few of the stories of my heroism ended up getting back to the TV stations down in Seattle, and it was eventually connected that some 41-year-old single guy who worked at a chain hardware store had saved multiple people in separate incidents. The TV reporters were dogged. They stayed on me until I caved and allowed them to do some kind of puff piece about me being a guardian angel. I did an interview high as fuck, but whatever. They aired it and paid me $200. I knew I shouldn't have done it. She came to my door that night around midnight. The ringing of the doorbell woke me up. I grabbed the flashlight taser I kept by my bed and crept to the front door. I tucked the taser light away once I saw her standing there on my dark front porch. Her long black hair half in her pale face. Her body was thin and lithe, cased in a long black dress. She appeared harmless. I opened the door, and she just stared at me for a few seconds like she was trying to confirm who I was by studying my face, silent all the while. "Can I help you?" I asked. She walked away without saying a word. I was so stunned I didn't get a word out until she was almost in her car. She just ignored my plea for her to come back and drove away into the night. The visit told me to stop what I was doing, stop helping, don't respond to the visions. The next night, I was presented with the vision of a middle-aged man, wedding ring, the kind of guy who looked like a dad. He got hit by an unexpected snowstorm while hiking in the mountains and was lost. What he didn't know was he was just 20 yards away from the parking lot and safety of his truck. But he couldn't see it through the snow, and he was too tired and cold to make it at this point. I could be up at that parking lot in less than 30 minutes. I could save him. But I wouldn't. Something told me not to do it. Just as something was sending these messages to be the hero, something was now creeping into the back of my head, telling me it would not end well for me. And not because of the snow. I had to stop interfering. I took down a few drinks, hoping getting drunk might block out the messages of this poor man's fading fate. It didn't work. I kept getting visions of that man lost up in the snow. He was now struggling to move. He wasn't going to be able to keep it going much longer. Unless I went up there and helped him. I couldn't watch a man die in the movie theater in my head. I jumped in my truck and drove up into the mountains. The snow was falling hard when I got to the parking lot. I had visions the entire way of where the man was. I knew he wasn't far from the lot, and was now crawling through the snow, wasting away the last few minutes of his life. I trudged through the snow in the direction where I was sure he was. I came across someone dressed in all black first. They were standing over something on the ground. nearly buried in the snow. It was the woman who showed up on my doorstep that night. She crouched down and held on to whatever was on the ground below her. I held myself there and watched what she was doing. Her hand was on the chest of the man on the ground. Visions flashed into me. I was in the POV of the man on the ground in the snow, looking upward at the face of the woman in black, her pupils wide and black, her skin ashen white, and her hand strong on my chest, feeling like it was pushing me down into the ground. She was taking away the man's life at that very moment. I could feel the man go still. Then the woman in black turned around to me. I started to backpedal towards my truck. She didn't say anything, just moved quickly towards me. I could feel a powerful anger rushing at me. It seeped into my muscles and made movement difficult. I was suddenly slow in my retreat back to my truck. She was not slow. She moved swiftly to me, and soon was almost within arm's reach of me. My vision started to move away from the dead dad over in the snow and to myself. I could now see myself lying on the ground next to my truck, with the woman in black on top of me, her hand pushed hard into my chest, draining the life out of me. I think she was sending me a warning more than anything, though. I didn't think she actually wanted to kill me. It was like she was telepathically telling me it wasn't my time. She played by the rules, but she was willing to bend them if I didn't stop. I would have to stop. I opened my mouth and told her that. She seemed to accept it. She walked away into the endless white of the snow, and I got in my truck and drove back home. Now I'm cursed. I sit at home every night knowing who is going to die in my vicinity, and how they are going to die, and knowing I could do something about it but won't. I drink more than I used to, and sometimes when I've had too much, which is almost every night, I think about getting back into my truck and going to save someone for whom I am their only hope for survival. Maybe I will someday.